I don't have an endless pot of gold in my bank account. And the fact that we got through COVID and balanced the books and come out and still managed to open a bakery, I thought was a bit of a miracle in itself, that I couldn't fight that profit margin that was just getting squashed constantly and not having the staff to do it, because all I ended up doing was covering all the shifts. So I'd be doing bar and bakery and cafe, which I can't, as much as I can try and work 24 hours and I don't need very much sleep. After doing 80-hour weeks for a while, I completely burnt myself out.
Welcome to Beyond the Fail, the podcast where we talk to leaders and entrepreneurs about their biggest business failures. We'll deep dive into how they overcame these setbacks, the lessons they learned from them, all to help you gain valuable insights. Failure is an essential part of the business journey, as well as being the key to success. So we're here to show you how to thrive from it. In today's episode, we are privileged to explore the fascinating entrepreneurial journey of Naomi Rose. Naomi's story is one of belief, tenacity, and risk-taking. Having started in digital leadership roles for some national charities, including the RSPB, taking that 8 years of experience, she took the courageous decision to actually leave this employment and follow her dreams and open a cafe bar. This was a significant roller coaster journey as she led and battled the business through the pandemic with such significant uncertainties and unprecedented challenges for the hospitality businesses during that time, to then securing £17,000 worth in crowdfunding to expand her business and then winning Britain's Best Loaf Awards. You'll hear how Naomi's marketing skills, intuitive leadership, and her community-led approach helped her make a success of the business despite some epic challenges and no prior hospitality experience. We'll delve also into her strategic decisions that she made, how she navigated the pandemic, and the post-COVID world which had such catastrophic impacts on her. Having started my own hospitality business many years ago, and also having worked in the industry for a few years, this episode actually brought a few memories, good and bad for me, about the demands of the sector. It really is a brutal industry, and this conversation highlights it well. So prepare yourself for a captivating and authentic exploration of Naomi's entrepreneurial journey. This is Beyond the Fail with Naomi Rose. Naomi, welcome to Beyond the Fail. Really looking forward to this conversation. It's been a kind of long time coming. Excuse my croaky voice. I've had a kind of sore throat and a cold for a few days, so I hope it's going to be okay. So, Naomi, take us back. Where did it kind of all start for you?
So I guess it started actually probably back in 2017, because I was doing a job and it was a nice job. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. 9 to 5. It wasn't 9 to 5. It was beyond 9 to 5. Nice people, nice company. But
Where were you working?
I was working in a national charity here in the UK. Okay. So I was heading up a digital team. So anything digital, marketing, all of that kind of thing I used to do. And I love doing events and that sort of stuff. My background, I'm a musician, so I'm a creative by nature, but I love a spreadsheet as well. So kind of doing a digital role helps quite well with that. But it just wasn't what I really wanted to do. So I thought, I'm going to sign up to the London Marathon because I can run 5 miles. So surely I can run a marathon, because I needed to know I could challenge myself. So that's what I did. And I kind of went, okay, right, 5 miles, 26. It's like day and night, isn't it? It was so hard, unbelievably difficult.
Did you ever done anything like that before?
No, never. I mean, I'd run like the race for life, the 5K, and I'd started the run club at work, which was 5K, but it was more chat than run. So I got to that point where I felt like I wasn't getting anything. I was doing a job I could do. It wasn't stretching me. I wasn't being challenged physically or mentally, and I needed to know that I could do something. So I thought, well, one of the charities I supported at the time's Final Research, they had charity spaces available, and I thought, I'll give it a go. Worst comes to worst, I'll walk.
Yeah, you can always do that. Yeah.
It's 26 miles, right? Yeah. I completely underestimated how hard it would be. It was beyond harder than I ever imagined because the training, the prep, the fundraising, everything took over my life. But when I got to the end of that marathon, it was like, I can't believe I've just done that. For so many years, I'd limited myself thinking that wasn't even possible for someone like me because I used to work out stuff, but never to that level. But yeah, I just achieved this marathon, which not everyone does every day. And that's where it kind of began. I was kind of like, so why am I limiting myself doing a job that is okay? I've just shown I can push myself beyond what I even thought was capable. So maybe I just need to really think about what I want to do next.
What were you looking for when you signed up to that marathon? Because, when you said you were kind of in a job that you weren't, I suppose, so sure about, that wasn't stretching you, I think not normal, but some people may respond to that by, potentially looking for another kind of project or a new job. But you went a slightly alternative way and decided to run a marathon. What were you looking to kind of prove there, or I suppose evidence from that?
To do more than I thought I could. It was have that opportunity to push myself beyond what I put my own limits in my head. I had a limit of what I thought I could do. And I used to watch the marathon every year and be completely in awe of these incredible people and just never thought that it was something possible for someone like me until the day I committed myself. And then I was like, I've got to do it now. I can't lose faith. So that's why I did it. It wasn't like career-wise, I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, but I knew I wasn't very good at working for other people. I mean, I was good at doing my job, and I always wanted to do better and get promotions and go to the next level. But it wasn't what was making me really happy. And I didn't like being kind of pigeonholed into certain sections of being able to do something. I wanted the freedom to make my own decisions and do what I wanted. So running that marathon was almost like my way of kind of going, I can do more than what someone is telling me I can or can't do. And most of that is myself telling me I can.
Yeah, I was going to say, was there anyone that was actually telling you couldn't do stuff, or have you got kind of limiting beliefs?
Probably, well, limiting beliefs for sure. But I think in some ways, in certain jobs, you're kind of like, well, even when you think, I really think you should be doing it this way, people tell you can't do it that way. So you can argue that, and then you end up doing stuff you don't necessarily agree with. And it was never really anything bad particularly, or, people have different opinions, but I'm like to be in control and make my own decisions. So often I would find that in my roles, there'll be things that the higher ups would want me to do that I just didn't feel comfortable doing. And that's where I kind of would end up sometimes. I thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. Doing a job that just doesn't make me do the stuff I love. Doing stuff that other people want me to do. I want to do something that I want to do.
And because obviously some of this sounds quite entrepreneurial, right? So, you know that, and I can definitely share some of those frustrations, I suppose, of being employed, essentially not having autonomy, not having, control over your decisions, being kind of boxed into, one sort of task area, one project area, whether that's, digital or HR or whatever it might be. Had you thought yourself as an entrepreneur in that way, or was some of this just a sort of general sense of frustration of where you're at in your career?
I think I had thought of myself as a bit of I wanted to work for myself. I didn't want to necessarily work for anyone else. And I was getting to that point where I was feeling like I could actually have the ability to do it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But when it got to I'd run the marathon in 2017. And I actually, in 2017, handed in my notice. And I went, don't know what I'm doing yet, but I know I've had,
big step.
That's my time here. Yeah, and I've been that person that does quit jobs before finding new ones, because I kind of think, well, I'll find something else. I'll find something else. It'll be fine. Everything will always be fine.
That's quite a brave thing to do. Not everyone would do that. Essentially, take that, which is people would view that as a bit of a risk. Are you kind of quite optimistic? Because there's an optimistic mindset of going, it will work out.
Yes, I suppose to some extent I do, but then I also think that as humans, we're born survivors, so we'll always find a way through. So that's the kind of, well, I'll find a solution here. The problem was the job I was in, and that was causing me a problem. So the solution was to leave it and find something else. So that's how I would view things. So it's looking at it from the opposite way.
Where do you think you've got that? Where do you think you've got that kind of that mindset from? Which I would say is not, it's the opposite to risk averse. It's very much willing to have faith in yourself, I suppose, to find a way and find a solution.
I think I've always been an independent person. I've got brothers and sisters, but they're older, 20 years older than me. So I didn't grow up really around people. I was on my own a lot of the time. I was quite independent and from a child. And I was actually a trained musician. So I started training as a musician. I can't really remember when I started playing music. There's always a piano in the house, but I actually knew I was going to be a musician from a very early age. I think it was about 7. I wanted to be a professional flautist. And in the world of theatre and music and everything like that, when you're growing up in performance, the show goes on regardless of whatever happens in it. And it's that attitude of just put your game face on and carry on. You'll find an option, there'll be a solution. And if you really want to do something, you'll find a way to do it, I think. And that was what kind of in the theatre. I mean, I used to work backstage in the theatre as well. So some of the things that would go wrong in the middle of a performance would be quite amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You just have to get through
it. What age did you start performing then? You said you performed from an early age.
6, 7, something like that. So quite early on.
Which that must give you a certain level of confidence to be on stage or performing in front of others.
It did, but I was quite heavily bullied at school. So even though I went on, I knew music was something I always wanted to do, and I went on to music college and all that sort of thing. But I had no confidence. By about the age of 10, I had none. Getting on stage, I was terrified and nervous every single time. I spent hours with people helping me with anxiety and teaching me how to perform all the way through university and college because of being bullied for that heavily. So even though it was inside of me, all of that time, all of those years where I was just heavily bullied, it just stopped me from doing what I could do. And that was doing music, really.
Do you reckon that's related to the limiting beliefs you were talking about earlier?
Quite possibly, actually. I mean, it's amazing how people's voices and opinions can affect you in so many ways. And actually, probably until I started running my own business, and certainly not for the first year or year and a half, did I actually really start to ignore what other people were thinking. So you could ask my dad now. I could have arguments till blue in the face with him because I'm so stubborn. But it certainly did limit what I thought I was able to do for such a long time.
Have you ever drawn that line to some of those comments early on, and what that kind of did to you, and then those beliefs that you had about yourself in your later years?
Some of them, yes. I mean, one of the ones that I had, which probably has my attitude of kind of keep calm and carry on, was I had a flute teacher who told me when I was about 8 years old, and I wanted to be a professional flautist. That was my dream at that point. And she told me, because my teeth stuck out, I had quite sticky out teeth at the time. She told me, because my teeth stuck out, I could never be a professional. I was 8. And that was what I was stuck with. And so obviously my parents fired her, because you don't tell a child that. It doesn't matter whether they're going to be professional or not. This is the wrong thing to say. And my mum went, well, why don't you learn to play a string instrument? Because you always need more string instruments in orchestras. And that's how I started the cello, and I played it ever since. So in some ways, it was finding a solution to a problem, even though it wasn't really a problem because I still got to grade 8 on the flute. But it was some of those thoughts are kind of like, well, I'll just find an alternative. But that shouldn't have been an alternative I had to make. So that's definitely kind of influenced a lot of my thinking over the years, I think.
And that's a great attitude from your parents as well. Obviously, very kind of supportive. Were they like entrepreneurs at all, or have they been strong role models to you?
Yeah, I mean, they've both had in some ways. So my dad's been my business partner.
Right.
So he, when I first kind of floated the idea of opening a cafe, in a sort of passing comment, he had been retired, I think about 5-10 years, something like that. And it's like, well, if you're going to do it, I want to do it. I was like, really? It's like, well, yeah. I mean, he got to that point in his retirement where he needed something more to do with his mind other than play golf. Yeah, he was. So that's what we decided to do. And my mum had her own business. She used to make curtains. So she, very similar to what I've ended up doing, which is kind of having that creative role and business role, she had the same thing. So she used to make soft furnishings and curtains as I was growing up to help me. So she was around when I was growing up while my dad was at work.
What did your dad do?
He worked in animal health, so he was a sales rep, but basically he grew up being around farm and animals and stuff like that. So farming has been sort of part of the family for a long time. I'm actually a vegetarian now, which was much their horror when I turned vegetarian about 25 years ago. But his role was all in animal health and farming and that sort of thing. That's where he grew up. He grew up on farms, and he went into doing that and agriculture, which is actually where he met my mum.
So you quit your job. How were you feeling at that point? Once you kind of quit.
Well, I'd quit, and I'd gone to and I'd always talked quite openly to my bosses that I wasn't going to stay there forever, and they said to me, so I handed in my notes and said, look, I'm getting frustrated with the role. I can't see where I'm going to go with it, and also that's not good for either me or the business. So whenever I've quit a job and I've not enjoyed, it's because I've not enjoyed doing my job. I always think, well, it's not good for me, it's not good for the business. So there's no point in me staying here because I'm not going to be that person that everyone dreads going into a meeting with. So that's why I'd handed in my notice. And they went, would you mind just staying an extra year and just covering the digital team? Because there was a post that said, all right, okay, I'll do that role, no more than a year, but on the basis that the job I've got now is backfilled permanently. So I don't want any people having any unknowing as to where their jobs are going to go, because anyone that's covered a maternity role or been in a maternity post or anything like that, there's always this unknown as to whether they're going to keep the job they're in or whether they're going to have to slide back a year in their career. I don't want that. I want people to know what they're doing. And of course, they were like, well, yes. I said, because I'm definitely going to leave. So I then definitely committed to leaving. And they're like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, don't know yet. I don't know. Something. So I've got a year to figure it out, though. You can be.
Oh, yeah. Actually, in some ways, that kind of worked out. Would you say that worked out better for you?
Probably did, actually, because it gave me a year to really think about what I was doing. And it was a good challenge to do a slightly different job from what I had been doing. But I mean, there was definitely a time limit on how long I was going to do that job for. It was just, it was definitely going to go back to the person who was doing it. So that was fine with me. But yeah, my team were like, so your job here is being advertised as a permanent role? I'm like, yeah, I'm not coming back. So what are you going to do? Don't know. Well, I couldn't do that. I'm like, well, you're not me. I couldn't do what you're doing now. In the sense of, some people have been there years are like, that's not me then.
Did that kind of naysaying ever get to you?
No, I don't think any of that did. Some of the, when I eventually worked out what I was going to do, and I thought, well, my skills are digital marketing, social, I'll probably just become a consultant because that's an easy in going into that sort of thing. When the idea of the cafe first came around, I kind of started talking to a few people about it. And that's when I got a lot of comments about, oh, no, I wouldn't do that if I was you. That's the last thing I'd do. I wouldn't risk opening a cafe bar. That's just crazy. They were the things I got. And they're from some of my family, some of my closest friends. And
why were they saying that?
Some of those thought it was their own limiting beliefs or what they would do. It's not for them. And I can understand it's not for everybody. But sometimes there are doubts in my head, like they would say, oh, I just wouldn't want the risk, the financial worry or anything like that. But then I don't want to stay in the comfort zone or being limited by what someone else thought I was worth.
So in some ways, that wasn't necessarily the business idea. That could be any business idea you could have come with them to, really. By the sounds of things, they didn't want to. They were kind of saying they didn't want the risk of opening a business, right? And you're right. Yeah. Entrepreneurship and business isn't for everyone.
No, it isn't. It's definitely a certain person that sees the ability to take that risk, I think. And not everyone does. And that is absolutely fine for them, but it wasn't for me.
So where did the motivation to start hospitality business and open a cafe come from?
Well, I'd always liked baking. So baking was something I'd done for a long time. I learned with my grandmother, and I've always baked at home. It was always something that I did. But it was like I was a hobby baker. But I watched every cookery show going as well. So anytime I got a bit stressed, because in my jobs I do massive campaign launches where, you'd have to do almost 18 hours of social media a day for several days and things like that. In between, like getting thousands of tweets and stuff in, I'll be baking just to calm myself down, but it'll be where I go to. And there was where I used to live. We used to walk my dog, then Bella, along the river into town and go and have a coffee every morning at Cafe Nero, so one of the chains, because it's the only place that allowed dogs in my entire town. Right. And we used to sit outside, and there would be this derelict building, which is still derelict in there. And it was an old pub once upon a time, but if it was renovated, if the council ever pulled their finger out and actually allowed people to do something with it, it would be the most incredible building right on the river. And we used to think this would be just an amazing cafe or a bar, and you kind of sit there and actually really picture what this place would look like. And one day we were walking back from this walk. We'd had our coffee and we were walking back. So we used to do sort of and there was a different building just behind the Cafe Nero that was being renovated, and it had been derelict for as long as I've lived in that town. Circus posters in the window, broken glass, blackout glass, the typical sad-looking old nightclub that once was an amusement arcade as well. And it was starting to be renovated, and the lady there, who was just come outside, who was renovating it, Liz, she came out, and I was just nosying through the window. She's like, do you want to come in and have a look? Like, sure. It's a building that's being renovated. I love looking at stuff like that. And I walked in, and it was horrible inside. It had like this horrible carpet. It had an old air conditioning unit that was broken in the ceiling. There was the amusement arcade booth, lime green, hideous bathrooms from back in the day when it was a nightclub. But she was saying, well, actually, this was originally built in 1929, and there was a picture on the wall that was opening day. And underneath the nightclub grime that was there was all the original 1920s features. So it had the original parquet, it had the original tall ceilings, the bronze work in the windows. And it was originally opened in 1929 as the Bedford Hunts and Cams electricity company showrooms. So it showcased what electricity could do in the modern home before electricity was there. Because behind that building was where power first came into the town. But yet all of this history had been lost under nightclub grime. And I was like, this building is going to be an incredible place for a cafe, bar, live music.
Yeah.
And it's suddenly that's where it started. I kind of had like a bit of a vision. And this is where I mentioned it to my dad. And he was like, why don't we give it a go? And it was about 4 months before the end of my contract was coming in my job. I was like, can we really do this? Because I'm not, one, never run a business, secondly, not a professional baker, I have no idea what I'm doing. But like, well, then just put a plan together and see where it ends up. And that's where it kind of all started.
So you basically just jumped into it in some ways. Was it kind of quite spontaneous?
It was an idea that had been there for a while. And I think, but my dad and I, and also my husband, who was my other business partner, we were all at that point where we feel like we needed to do something. And it was kind of the conversations that we had were like, these opportunities don't come around that often in that sense to do stuff. So what exactly are we waiting for? if we want to give it a go, let's just give it a go and see how it goes. We'll learn as we go. We're going in knowing nothing, so we're only going to grow from here. And as long as we kind of have that open-mindedness of like, let's just learn, then I'll be fine. And also have my plan, which I was a project manager, so project management spreadsheets was my thing. So I had a huge document, because this building was not a cafe. It was an old nightclub that needed huge amounts of work to it, let alone working out how to run a cafe and bar and bakery and get staff and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, it wasn't the traditional method of going into business. It was definitely the let's go for it kind of approach.
Well, I mean, a lot of businesses do start that way, and obviously, Richard Branson's famous for his saying, "Screw it, let's do it." But obviously, I think you've got to take that with a pinch of salt, because obviously, Virgin don't do anything without any, due diligence or plans behind them. But so what was there ever any doubts or any fears around making that leap into and taking that whole enterprise and liability on?
Oh, so many. So many. It was almost like there was two sides of my brain. The brain that kind of was like, this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to say it out loud to people, because I know if I don't, then the other side of my brain will take over and I won't do it. But as soon as I've committed, that's it, I'm in. And I've held myself accountable, because I told people I can't be the person that commits to an idea and then chickens out.
I can see there's a pattern here, because it's exactly the same mindset as the marathon, right?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of like, I committed, I've said I'll do it. I have to show that I can do it. If it's not to anyone else, it's got to be to myself.
So yeah, you're very good at accountability to yourself, which is, was that the only thing that helped you overcome those fears and doubts then? Was that accountability?
I think having that plan. In some ways, having been a project manager, and I came at it, my background being like marketing, digital, social, I knew that was what was going to really help me make this business work. So I'd spent a long time working out who my customers were, how they were their behaviours, their buying patterns. I knew everything about my customers before they'd even come in the door, because I had that really clear picture of what they were in my head. And that came from the experience I'd had in my previous roles. And even though I never opened a business, I'd done so many massive campaign launches. It was basically the same approach I took. Just the difference was it was my business that was the risk I was taking. And I just had to kind of reapply my knowledge and learnings and do it with that instead.
So what success did you sort of see within that business once you opened?
Well, I suppose in some sense it was, originally I just wanted to provide a place that people could go to. So part of my reason for doing it was I liked to have a place where I could go with my dog, that could enjoy coffee, relax, nice music, good company, like a home away from home. I wanted it to be a place where people felt included, that if you're on your own or whether you're with friends, it'll be somewhere warm you can go to. That's what I wanted to provide. So it was actually more than just serving coffee and cake and making stuff. It was about that experience, about that escape. And that, I suppose, in some ways, that came from the art side of my head, where I'm a musician and I've worked a lot in the arts, and knowing how important arts is, in the same way that having somewhere you can go for a nice coffee is as important to so many people of any age, really. So that's what I kind of was really driving me forward in kind of wanting to create this business.
And when you opened, what was the response like from the local community and customers?
Opening day was a carnage. I mean, obviously, any opening day,
always is, yeah.
You got tech. My staff were not tech savvy, and I'm obviously tech savvy person because I'd run digital teams, but I wanted to make it as efficient and automated as possible. So that took a while to get, but it was a really good response. I mean, any business that you go in on opening day compared to 3 years down the line is completely different, because it's such a big learning curve. You don't know who you're going to get in the door. You don't know how much to bake. You don't know where the business is going to end up or head. And you're kind of doing your best guesstimate just to get through the day. I put so much effort and energy into getting the doors open. I'd forgotten then, being given it was the 4th of December we opened on, they then had Christmas to get through. And it was our busiest time as well. So I'd got, even before I'd opened, I'd got private parties booked in for the evening. Like, you don't even know my business set, and people are booking up private parties. So the response was amazing. I mean, the community, when you go into the forums, you're always going to get people that are grumbling that another coffee shop is opening. Oh, we got that. And I listened to them quite a lot to begin with, but I certainly got a thicker skin much later on. I'm like, well, there's plenty of coffee shops in the town, and actually we're better together. In the same way that the bar, I was one of 2 or 3 different cocktail bars. So we're a small town, but actually me being there along with the other businesses, we're better together because people don't want to drink in just one place. They want to drink in several. So, and same with coffee. We offered different coffees because people had different tastes. So we supported each other in that way. So it was, the town was definitely a good community to open, and they're very supportive. And some of my loyalist customers came from day one and were still there at the last day as well. So, you know, it was with the team, the approach I wanted to take with the business was with that friendly, warm and opening, and, you know, being dog friendly as well. My team were all like that. They were friendly people. We were people they could come in and chat to, and we weren't going to kind of have that. It wasn't about being trendy or cool or hip. That was definitely not that. But we wanted to be just modern and classic. So that's what we were aiming for.
And what was your role on day to day?
It was everything, I think, would be fair to say. I did most roles because I struggled to really find my role to begin with. I really, having come from being part of a team, even though I led, you know, I was manager of a team, and I'd done a huge amount of leadership and management training, which my previous company funded quite a lot of. I also didn't want to feel like I was above the rest of people, so I ended up being involved quite a lot, which I think it wasn't really until we'd gone into COVID and the lockdown, when I took a step back and really thought about my role in the business, I realised I was probably doing the wrong thing. So I really thought about where I needed to be and what my use was best for the team. So some days I would be on service, some days I'll be in kitchen, some days I would be on the bar. So I knew how to do everything. But when I started to think about it, I'm like, I'm not really being what I should be in this business. And that was actually leading it. And that's when I started to have to rethink exactly how my business was running.
But you had other people doing all those roles. Because when you said you were, you had the baking skills, I was anticipating you saying that you were the one in the kitchen doing the baking. Did you train other people to do that on your behalf?
I didn't train people necessarily because I work collaboratively. So my kitchen staff that were with me from the beginning to the very end, they were with me for the entire journey of my business. They taught me a lot about what they know, and we used to share a lot of knowledge, and we worked together. So I'd still be doing the baking. In fact, it didn't even occur to me when I first opened, and it was a few years ago now, but I didn't really even think about needing to redo any vegan or gluten-free bakes. And I didn't have any knowledge. I never made anything gluten-free or vegan before. So I learned how to do that, and I became the one that could do the gluten-free and vegan bakes. But then I helped teach some of my other staff, and they taught me something. So we learned together, because sometimes one of the things I certainly learned a lot through leadership training is, and certainly in my teams when I worked in digital, like I work with developers, so web developers have huge amounts of skill, and I can do some very basic coding, but very basic. I don't need to know how to do all the coding to be able to run a digital team, because there are people that get paid far better than I do to do those jobs. But what I need to do is be able to lead. So even though I did some of the baking, it wasn't necessarily my only role, and I could employ people that were equally as skilled. And when I was working out how I wanted the business to be positioned, I talked about it with the team, because they were going to be part of the business and they were going to be there every day. So I didn't want to build this business just with my own ideas, because I wanted them to have the creative ability to do what they want. So when we were talking about what we were going to bake, their input was equally as important, because they'd worked in the industry before and I hadn't. Well, I mean, I worked in the bars back when I was like 18. It's not quite the same thing. So their knowledge and their skills were invaluable to me, because they're like, well, I'm going to listen to you, because even though I might want to take my business in a certain direction, you've probably got a lot more knowledge in this area. So let's talk about it and work out what's right for us moving forward as a team. So that's how we approached it.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely, the right way to be in a team. And they say that essentially as a leader, you want to potentially be the least qualified person, the least knowledgeable person in the room amongst your team. And as you say, your role is there to bring them all together and give clear direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
You talked earlier about realizing that you actually needed to lead the team rather than potentially be part of the team. When was there a kind of moment of realization that prompted that?
I think it had been building for a while, but when I actually was able to make that change was when we went into lockdown, in the first lockdown, because it'd been 15 months. So we hadn't had huge amount of time to build up the business. And it was a 7-day-a-week business, plus evenings and events. So I've got live music, got bar, I got the cafe. So it was like it was quite a busy and intense time. And I would be there most days, if just trying to figure out what to do, covering shifts sometimes, because the staff I thought I needed when I first opened doubled pretty much instantly, because I planned for the worst case scenario, but not the best case. So I had to change all of that. So there was a lot of learning in that first 15 months. And I knew that what I was doing wasn't necessarily sustainable or the best use of my time. So when we got into the pandemic, and some hospitality businesses decided to go takeaway and try and keep it going, ingredients were so hard to get hold of, let alone any takeaway packaging. And we weren't set up for takeaway. And I'm like, you know what? We don't know what's going to happen with this pandemic. I want my staff to be safe at home. I'm not in a position to offer any of that. So let's just take this time that we don't get very much in business to kind of go, we're going to pause for a minute and look at where we're going next. Get rid of all the crap stuff, and we're going to take forward all the good stuff. And let's really think about each of our jobs in this business. And that's what we did. So I started to look at a lot of data and analyze stuff and think about where my role was going to be. And then I talked to, when we were allowed to eventually gather outside, we'd sit in the park and we'd go through it. And I'd share my ideas, and they would have ideas of their own. And I didn't have a general manager from the start. I was the general manager. I managed everybody. And that was one of the things I changed most, was have someone that can manage the operations, because I was trying to do all of that and it wasn't realistic. I couldn't focus on the strategy. I couldn't focus on growing the business because I was too busy doing all the doing. So I restructured the team. I streamlined it, and I'm glad we did, because those few months and years through COVID was challenging in so many ways for hospitality, because the rules changed all the time. We had to be so fluid and respond with not much notice to whatever was coming out. Actually, the structure I had before was not going to work, and my role that I had before was not going to work. So that gave me the opportunity to kind of go, I now need to think about how I lead this business through a really challenging time, and hopefully we'll get through at the other end. That was where we were.
Oh, it sounds like you're a very intuitive leader, by the stories that you've kind of said so far. And I think with some brave decisions that you kind of made. That decision to essentially pause the business and during COVID, how long did you do that for? And then my sort of other question that I was curious to know is how did you make ends meet in terms of finances? Were people put on furlough? How did that work?
Yeah, so I mean, the people being put on furlough was definitely, like, the government funded that. So my staff all kept their jobs. So no one, because the week before COVID, I was actually telling them they were made redundant, because like my customers literally just dropped off the face of the planet, as they should do. And I was like worried for my own staff's health and safety at that point. So being able to furlough my staff and get that government support and the grants, and fortunately I worked really closely with a really good network of business owners in the local town. It was a very supportive community and still is. And we were able to kind of get the information we needed at a real practical level. That helped us get all the grants and all of those things that helped businesses get through that time. So without that March 2020, we would have had to shut. There was no other choice. So we would have to sort of figure out what went on from there. So it was having to be agile and really rethink strategy and planning, and we really did test sort of that strength of getting through that, of how were we going to get through it. There was no knowledge at that point, but being able to take the step back and kind of go, the best thing for the business is to put a strategy in place that allows us to be fluid and grow in the unpredictability. Because the cafe, we knew would open before the bar. We knew because the bar definitely got limited, and the bar was the thing I had because I knew it would make more money than the cafe. So the bar was the money maker, which when people aren't allowed to sit next to each other made it very difficult. So we had to rethink the strategy, which is where I started thinking about baking bread. And this is where bread came back in. So during that lockdown, I learned again how to bake bread. I'd always baked bread, but I had, before COVID, I work with local suppliers because my business is in the community, working with the community. So all my suppliers mostly were local. And I trust them, I knew them, we talked to each other, we would be very open, and I liked that respect we could have between each other. And I had worked with a bakery, there weren't many bakeries near me, and I was working with a bakery, but they were just having endless problems with staff. And sometimes my deliveries wouldn't come until about 12 o'clock lunchtime. I'm like, I had a 3-hour service before then that needed bread. And they're having to run out to the local supermarket to go and grab some because they hadn't brought any. And it wasn't working. I don't really want to have to go to the cash and carry to get bread. So I'm going to start making our own. And that's where the bread side came in. And didn't have a big kitchen. It was like a home range oven I brought. Because, like I say, we were home cooks. So I was like, what kind of oven do you want to my team? And they were like, something that's not complicated. All right, how about this? They were like, yeah, it's great. So it's only small, but it worked for us because that's what worked for us. Wow. And I started making bread just for the cafe. Thought, right, well, at least this is in our control. I can control the service because I know we're going to have bread. And I taught my staff how to do some of the bread because they'd never done bread making before. And it was when I realised that people was actually really enjoying what we're selling. I thought, I've got a side hustle going on here. I've got a business about to grow here. And I thought, if I'm not going to be able to have a bar, maybe I can have a bakery, because actually a lot of bakeries did very, very well during COVID. There was certainly around in our local area, they were queuing out the door. But we didn't have a artisan baker. There was no artisan bakery in our town. I'm like, okay, right, let's see what we can do there. Where can the business grow? And I had a back room which we'd use for group bookings, for like the baby showers, because our cafe had really tall ceilings, which is great, except when you've got a lot of women in one space who are quite high pitched, and then it makes it a nightmare for everybody else. So we used to put them in the back room. Of course, group bookings were banned. So I can't remember what rule we were on at that point, rule of 6 or something like that. I'm like, okay, I've got a room which I'm paying for, which isn't doing anything for my business right now, but it could be a bakery. And that's where I started thinking about, how can I open this bakery? Because I've got no cash flow. The cash flow is there to balance the books, but I've got nothing else to invest right at this moment. Certainly not enough. So I thought, I'll go to a bank and get a resilience loan, because they were offering those at the time. And they went, nope, you can't have one. Why not? Because you're not making money. I'm like, I'm breaking even. I'm a cafe that's breaking even during COVID. That is pretty good in my book. No. I'm like, well, what's the point of a resilience loan if you're only making profit? How on earth is that logical? Anyway, that's a different issue altogether. But then someone said to me, well, why didn't you crowdfund? I'm like, why don't I crowdfund? It's like a genius idea. I've got an ultimate marketing campaign that I can get maximum publicity for, and then get people invested that will help me open it. I've got customers before I've even built the thing. Like, it's great idea. Plus, if it fails, I've not lost anything because I know people don't want it. So like, God, why did I think of this? It's stupid. And so that's where I decided that actually, if I can't have a bar that's going to function properly, a bakery would probably do quite as well. And that's where the bakery came in.
And how much did you raise?
£17,000.
What was your target?
15.
Good going.
So we'd exceeded, yeah. And we had a little bit of money that we put in ourselves, and everything was secondhand. And a bakery needs a relatively simple setup, really, and it was going to be sourdough. So there was sourdough and yeasted breads, because I like working with yeast. I mean, I was not a fan of sourdough, but I knew my customers would want that. And I tried sourdough during lockdown, like the rest of the world, and failed miserably. And I thought, I'm going to have to just get to grips with it. I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and work out how to make sourdough.
Did you turn that room into a kitchen, or was that the sort of...
It became the bakery.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so that room became the bakery because we had the service kitchen downstairs, but it wasn't big enough to have like many layers. Yeah. And the deck oven that I got was 3/4 of a ton. It was huge. It had 3 decks and it was massive. And when we brought it, I didn't tell the people that were delivering it. It had to go upstairs as well.
Keep that quiet.
So, yeah, until like the day they were going to arrive. So it involved all sorts of lifts, and I think they got there about 6 in the evening and finished at 2 a.m. trying to get the thing in. It was a bit of a beast. But yes, fortunately, I didn't have to remove that myself. But anyway, it went in, and I thought this space would actually be perfect for a bakery because actually it's pretty much ready to go kitchen. It was already up to the environmental standards that it needed to be. It just needed the extractor, which is the most expensive thing most kitchens can ever buy half the time. It's surprising how much extraction costs, which was the biggest. That was 3/4 of the budget on the extraction.
Wow.
And and then the rest was just the like having a deck oven, mixer, a couple of tables, and a proving oven. Oh, and a fridge, because actually, despite contrary belief where you put all your dough in the airing cupboard, actually a lot of our sourdough went in the fridge for 2 or 3 days.
So then you launched, and how did it go? How was it received?
Oh, it was amazing, actually, the support we got from the local community, and we got over 300 people that backed us. I mean, it was just phenomenal how many people really wanted to support the business and my idea. And that's when I actually realised the business I created was more than just me now. It was actually a community-based business. And it had been for a time, but I was just like this small part of it now compared to what it become. It was really overwhelming. So, but being able to actually open up that bakery with the community backing us and that support, it was kind of like that forward drive. And we were so busy when we came into 2022. It was just, I had to get another till system in. We had queues out the door constantly. It was just manic. It was like starting again. Yeah. And of course, wow. At that point, because I've been focusing on the bakery side and opening that up and working with, I've got a head baker in because I knew I couldn't do that myself. And we were building it together and coming, trial and testing and getting things ready. I got my front of house team were managing all of the front of house. I've given them the responsibility to organise it themselves because they're best placed to do it. I would only get in the way and cause more chaos. So it was like starting again. It really was starting again from scratch, having to reorganise everything, sort out everything, try and work out who's going to queue for the cafe, the bakery. Oh, it took a while, but it was amazing to have that kind of response to what we'd done.
So essentially you had a dual business, you had 2 businesses running then, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, really I'd had 3 because the bar was also then literally a separate entity in some ways. Because the bar was actually in the cafe itself. So at night time, because we served cocktails, we actually put a separate cocktail bar in. And it was like, the cafe was a completely different audience on the whole to the night time. And it was a different setup. So if you came in the day and the night, you wouldn't recognise the places because the atmosphere changed completely. It was very, very different. But we set it up in that way. I made, my brother-in-law had actually built the bar, and I made him make it so it was multifunctional, so we could adapt it to different needs. Amazing. So, yeah.
Did you reopen the bar after COVID?
We did, on and off, when we were allowed. It was challenging. And people did come out, but not in the same way they used to. The cafe, they were definitely more willing to come out. The bar, they were less so. And it was, I think at one period, it was closed for about 6 months in total because we just couldn't open it. We didn't serve food. And that was one of the rules in the UK is you have to serve food if you're going to sell alcohol. Like, I'm not going to start selling food just to open the bar because it's going to cost me money to do that. And we're not in that position. So we couldn't do it. So it stayed shut for a long while before we reopened. And we did, and of course, I'd run a lot of events. So I had lots of musicians because my background in music, part of the whole entity of the bar and the business was to bring new music into the town, bring culture into the town, support young artists, new artists, that sort of thing, which I'd done for 15 months before and then wasn't able to do any of that. So it was a real...
Nice.
The cafe was, even though the rules changed a lot, was the easier thing to manage. The bar was just something we couldn't do anything with, and it was so frustrating. And my team wanted to work; they loved doing their jobs. It was frustrating for them as it was for me.
And I'm intrigued. You said that obviously you made a clever decision to open the bakery and slightly pivot when you couldn't open your bar. You talked about the bar being the money maker. Did the bakery end up being as kind of profitable as a bar, or giving you the sort of level of revenue that you had before?
To some extent, yes, but I needed more staff to do it. So it might have given me some of the revenue, but the whole business was different by that point. COVID had, the predictability I had before COVID had gone. I couldn't tell you what day of the week was going to be busiest, whereas before I had a really clear idea. Some days, Tuesdays were busier than Saturdays, and it just made no sense. There was no logic to work to people's behaviours, and I watch people's behaviours and I study their kind of patterns, and I look at the numbers and I look at the information, and it was just that uncertainty of knowing what to do next. So in the prime, the bar was making huge amounts of money. But of course, all of that had been just pulled out from under us. And it's not a lot I can do. We tried bringing back an evening food service, but it wasn't the right model for us. It wasn't the right business direction to go in. And it would have taken, we weren't a restaurant. That's not what we were known for. We were a cocktail bar with live music. That's what we did. But we didn't have the footfall at that point. So yes, the bakery did, but that's because the whole bar model had changed.
And I'm sitting here listening to you, and it sounds like an amazing enterprise. You've got, a successful bakery. You've got a bar that does live music with cocktails. You've got, a cafe during the day. I'm kind of struggling to put that together of how you went from that to closing it down.
So, we opened the bakery in 2022. Was it 2022? Yes, it was 2022. We're in 2023 now. Get the years now. But the other thing I'd done, unbeknown to my team, is I decided to enter them into Britain's Best Loaf Awards. So about 4 weeks after opening, I entered them into this national competition against the best bakeries in the country. Because in my head, I'm like, we're going to learn something. We'll have a nice day out. It's Food Expo. We'll meet other bakeries. We'll get some feedback on what we're doing right and wrong. And I eventually fessed up to the team what I'd done, because I knew if I told them too soon, they would freak out, and they did freak out. I'm like, look, it's a learning thing. We're not going in there to do anything other than learn. We're going to take our loads, find out where we sit in how good we are at what we do, get some useful feedback from industry experts. It's time to learn. So I took the team, and I've never been to an awards where they judge food like this. Literally, there were people in lab coats. It was quite frightening.
No.
Like, lots of people in lab coats, and they're literally pulling everything apart, really getting into the nitty gritty of it. And we watched for a while. I mean, the judging took a long time, and in the end, I'm like, I can't. It's too much pressure, because you couldn't hear anything they were saying either as they went around all of these hundreds of loaves of bread. And I really wanted to know how our sourdough was doing, because we spent a lot of time working on that. And we'd taken our white loaves. So we'd done 2 or 3 different loaves, and we ended up winning. I couldn't believe it. We'd been open 3 months.
Yeah, that's amazing. Which category did you win?
We won in the white farmhouse, so our traditional yeasted bread. But we came 3rd in sourdough, I think. There's 3rd or 4th. I can't remember what it was. Something.
Sure, that was a strong competition, sourdough, yeah?
Wow, yeah, it's huge. There was so many in that one. But the only reason we didn't quite get number 1 was because we put too much flour on it. That was it. We dusted it with too much flour. It was that close. I was like, I can't believe that we've gone from having crowdfunded this bakery to then winning this national award against some of the bakeries that I followed and watched and got information. Like, I learned from them. They taught me so much to get to where we were. It was just phenomenal.
Incredible, yeah.
And we thought at that point, I remember having the conversation with my head baker, because we honestly, driving back from Birmingham that day, we couldn't believe what we'd done. And we just completely were like, it's going to really open doors for us. We're kind of coming out of this really heavy period of challenges. And almost a week later, cost of living hit. And the world just kind of took another pivot, which we just weren't expecting. And it suddenly went from kind of having this plan, having this award, to not knowing when we're going to get flour next. My flour deliveries went from 3 days to 14 days overnight. And it wasn't like we were having a bag of flour a day. I was running out to supermarkets at 10:30 at night trying to find flour, and like 25, 30 kilos worth of flour. Okay. And everything just went up in cost. Everything was just increasing. And there was only so much you can do to charge people more. You can pass on the cost to a certain extent, and I did a little. But ultimately, my customers also started changing their patterns, because the media was all about the cost of energy and all of this. And even my loyal customers that were still coming in were spending less. There was a notable difference. And it was almost, you could tell where that line had changed. You can see it in the figures, you can see it in everything. And there was also something that happened in the baking world, and it was the same for a lot of industries, where employees disappeared. I don't know where they all went, but bakeries suddenly were desperate for bakers. And I was in a small town outside of Cambridgeshire, so I wasn't like in a big city or anything. And the bakeries in Cambridgeshire were offering staff that had no to little experience the salaries of people that had been working 3 to 4 years, which was much more than I could ever afford to pay, or was willing to pay as well, because I'm like, that's skiing the market. As an employee, I was very open with my employees and talking about them, and they would be telling me, saying, well, there's job opportunities come up in Cambridge and they're paying considerably more than you are. Like, there's nothing I can do about that. And if I were you, I would go for it, because that is an opportunity not to miss. But bakeries were desperate for it, and they were paying for people without the experience. So I'd spent a long time training up. Most of my bakery team were apprentices and never baked professionally before. I trained them up, and then they went and got jobs that were paying 6, 7, 8 grand more than I could afford. And everything just went against us. I kind of would try and pivot and move, but my hands being tied. The bar really got hit, because people were definitely not coming out buying cocktails. People weren't part of a coffee. People wore coffee. If it wasn't coffee, I think my business would have closed sooner. But they didn't necessarily want cocktails, and I couldn't justify paying the staff in the evenings to come in when we didn't have enough trade. So I had to call the bar. And even though I could try and get live music events on, everybody's costs and everything had gone up. So we were just fighting battles on every front. And I looked to kind of go, well, maybe we could go online. We could do scone deliveries online, because that's maybe an option. It was totally the wrong location to do that in. We didn't have the right setup for that kind of a business. And the rents weren't cheap. It was quite expensive place to be in when you don't have that kind of footfall, when the footfall had changed. So I adjust and pivot as much as I possibly can. But actually, at the end of the day, the bottom line is not making ends meet. So I have to make a decision here. And I fought it quite a lot. But because my staff were leaving to go to bigger, shinier jobs in the city, and people weren't then wanting to do the work. So I interviewed more people in that last year than I have done in the entire time I had my business. And some of the people would come in and go, I only want to work Monday to Wednesday daytimes. I'm like, it's a bakery role. My team start at 2 a.m. So if you want to be a baker, that's what you're going to have to do. And people weren't willing to do it. So that was really challenging. And I couldn't get the staff out in that small town. They weren't willing to travel. So it was a really hard decision to have to make. And it was the right one, but one I thought, because I still was employing about 10 people at the time. And I didn't want them to lose their jobs because I felt responsible for them. But I don't have an endless pot of gold in my bank account. And the fact that we got through COVID and balanced the books and come out and still managed to open a bakery, I thought was a bit of a miracle in itself, that I couldn't fight that profit margin that was just getting squashed constantly and not having the staff to do it, because all I ended up doing was covering all the shifts. So I'd be doing bar and bakery and cafe, which I can't, as much as I can try and work 24 hours and I don't need very much sleep. After doing 80-hour weeks for a while, I completely burnt myself out. So
what did that burnout look like?
I had to close. I closed for a month. So before we actually closed, I closed for a month.
Seriously?
Because I couldn't see the wood for the trees. I couldn't get a grip because I was just trying to, literally, I would be walking to work at 5 a.m, trying to get bakery shifts done. Then I'll be into the cafe. Then I'll be having to then do all the paperwork. And then I'll be trying to find staff. It was just endless. And then on the weekends, I'll be trying to keep the bar going. I just couldn't do what I needed to do, which was work out where to go next. Because all I was doing was firefighting, and there was a new fire every day. I mean, it was like the business was ready to close. Like, so it would be like, yep, what's today? Oh, yeah, the dishwasher was broken today. Okay, great. And of course, commercially, everything costs money. So every time something breaks, you have to pay for it. It's not like consumer. Or the oven's broken today. Okay, great, right. We'll try and figure out how to fix that. So there'll be a new thing that needed a solution to it every single day. So I couldn't get a grip of the business because all I was doing was trying to keep the day-to-day going, and it wasn't working. The day-to-day wasn't working. So I obviously ended up burning out and went, I need to stop. I need to stop for a month to get a grip of this and work out whether I can make this financially viable or whether I will have to close. And that was where I got to.
And then what did you do over that month to come to the conclusion of closing?
Well, I think firstly I had a bit of sleep, which was well overdue. I had a bit of a rest. And I mean, when you're working a bakery or a food industry business, you're on your feet all the time. So some of my days were over 30,000 steps. That was my average, was over 30,000 steps just working. So I was physically and mentally exhausted. And I'd, during that time off, I'd actually gone to London for a bit of a fitness craze person. I love doing fitness, but I'd gone to a fitness convention with one of the fitness groups that I work with called Les Mills. And it'd been in my diary for months and months and months. So I'd have gone to that. I was exhausted. Like, I'm going to this because I'm big fans of these people. They're in New Zealand. And I really, really...
Because you've committed.
I had committed. But I got to stay in a boat house, like the Good Hotel, which is a floating barge on the docks outside Excel. So that was lovely. And in a way, it was like that other part of my... like a passion of mine. I like doing fitness, and being around some really inspirational, motivational people helped me just kind of really think I need to take a step back and work out what I do from here. And what I went back with was I looked at going online. I took a bit of a break from everything. I saw some family, I saw some friends. I went for some long walks. Actually, what I went in was, I don't think I can get this business out of where we are now, because I can't see this economic problem of all the prices, and I'm not just talking small prices, I'm talking, increasing. They went up massively. It was just really, really tricky. But I couldn't see necessarily that I was going to be able to keep the business going for much longer. But what I did kind of go back in was, I'm going to keep it going until I can't. So if I can weather that storm and some miracle happens and the government decides that it's going to give me a grant of some sort again, then maybe we'll get through it. If not, I'll keep the doors open until I no longer can. And that's where I'd got to. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe I could do like a separate scone business online and take it to a different. There was no point in paying for a high street location. Do something that wasn't high street because you pay a huge amount of rent on that. So I kind of got this other idea of a different business brewing in the back of my mind of what I could do. But at that time, I was like, I just want to keep people in jobs as long as possible. And I was quite open with my staff and my customers about what I needed to do. So I'm like, I need to stop. I need to rethink where we're going from here. I've not got enough staff right now, but I can't do everything and then work out what to do next. So I need that break.
So you were kind of open with the team that essentially the business was struggling a little bit?
Yeah, when we were talking about what I was going to go to the press with, because I've been in the press quite a few times because I was quite vocal about stuff and I've been on the radio, and particularly with the crowdfunding and everything like that, often I would get asked to go and do radio interviews or TV interviews or that sort of thing. And I was quite happy to go and do all of those. So when I decided to close the business, I went out, I kind of said, this is why. I'm completely exhausted. I'm working too much. What's the impact of what's happening now is not just happening to me, it's happening to a lot of people. It's just that you don't see that. And I'm going to be outspoken because I can be, whereas other people don't feel comfortable doing it. And I can see from inside the industry what was going on. But of course, we are in hospitality, so we serve everything with a smile and keep calm and carry on. The reality is very different behind the scenes of what people were having to deal with on a daily basis. So I wanted to be that person that could give people support and raise awareness for some of the issues that were happening in and around their local communities and towns. And I was always open with my staff and while I was doing stuff, and I was saying I've got to stop because I don't know what to do next. I'm running out of options. The bakery staff have basically left because they've got bigger and better, shinier jobs than I could offer. So everything I had a few months ago is gone in like hardly any time. So I need to either come up with a new plan or look at what my options are. And yes, we might have to close, but that will be the absolute final resort if I can't think of where to go next.
And what was that breaking point? Because you said you would keep it open until you couldn't. So what was that moment that you knew that it was over?
I knew I wasn't going to get to the end of the month and pay everything. So I knew financially at that point that would be it. So we've got through the Christmas period, and then I looked at the forecasting and thought, I'm not going to make it to the end of this next month. And that's when I decided in January I was going to have to call it.
How did that feel?
Tough. It was tough. It was not a decision I wanted to make. It was something that wasn't just me that had worked really hard to do it. And I felt responsible because I was the one that had managed it and led it. And even though my husband and my dad were business partners, they were to some extent, well, kind of silent partners, but they weren't involved in the operations. I was the one that was giving it the direction and the leadership. But yeah, I couldn't get through this. I got through so much, but I couldn't get through this. And I was responsible for my staff, and I felt responsible for a community that had been there for me when I needed them, but I couldn't be there to continue through a really difficult time. And it made me feel very sad because some of my customers, they were regular. I mean, on our first year anniversary, we'd had a customer that had been coming in every day since day one, and that person would come in with their dog. And on our 1 year anniversary, they came up to me and said, I want to thank you and your team for being here, because he'd lost his partner a month before we'd opened, and they'd been together a very long time, and he didn't know what to do with himself. But the business I'd created was the comfort he needed to give him a routine that he suddenly had to find a new one for. And that's exactly why I started the business. So knowing that I wasn't necessarily going to be able to support people like that was really quite upsetting. And my staff were, they were an incredible bunch of people, and some of them had been with me from, my employees were like from 15 to 78. They were real spectrum of
78.
People. Yeah, that was my neighbour and her entire fam. I've had her entire dynasty work with me. So I had her and a daughter and a granddaughter at one point. So we had the whole of them in there. But it was, some of them had really grown as people, as what they'd done, their skills. They taught me a lot about business. They challenged me in some ways, but it was like a big family. And that was it was a real loss to have to go through that. And in the same way that we had been for the past few years, they just kept calm and carried on. They'd find another thing to do and move on to the next thing. They weren't flappable in that way in some ways. They would like the kind of attitude I've had all the way through it was find the solution, not the problem. They were like, well, one of my staff was like, well, I'm going to move up to Yorkshire then. Right, great. But it was really hard to do. It was having to close down a business, any business, particularly in that way where the choice was slightly taken away from me. I mean, there's always a choice, but I was left with very little options as to what I could do financially at that point. So that was really tough to take.
And I suppose from the staff's point of view, they could probably see it coming as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, there wasn't, like I said, I was quite open with them. They were quite intuitive. They'd ask me questions and I'd give them straight answers. I didn't want to be that person that gave them a line just to keep them there. If they felt that the business was going to go under and they wanted to leave, I'd let them have that opportunity to do that. But they didn't. They stayed. I told them, I think, because I had to liquidate the business because I knew it was going to not make it. It wasn't not going to. I didn't kind of end in huge amounts of debt, but what I wasn't going to be able to do was pay some of the bills back. The insolvency company, because it costs money to insolve your business, so to go into liquidation, it actually costs quite a lot. And I knew I had to stay open long enough to make the money on that final day,
right,
to make the money to pay for the liquidators and to make sure my staff got paid, because they were my priority. I didn't want them to go out of pocket because they'd done so much for me. So I had to go out all guns blazing because I needed to get enough income in to pay everybody the money so that the business would end like at zero in that sense. So that's what I had to do. So I did a big media song and dance for the last day. I went out with the press release. I went,
oh really?
Yeah, because but the insolvency company were like, you can't stay open because you're saying you're insolvent. I'm like, but I can't pay you unless I do this. So and also I owe it to my customers to give them that opportunity to come in again. So that's what I had to do.
And that's an interesting way of approaching a closure of business, because I think some people just, often just shut their doors and that's it. Was that some of that because you obviously so ingrained in that community as well? You felt you owed that to that community? And obviously I was also pondering about all your crowdfunders as well. Was there ever any, I suppose, guilt or thought about them and what they had given to you?
Oh yeah, huge amount. I mean, ironically, we closed the entire business exactly 1 year after I'd opened the bakery. So that whole year had just completely done a 180 on us. And I felt so guilty that everybody had given so much, and yet I couldn't deliver long term for them. I couldn't provide what they'd invested in. And the majority of people were really understanding, and I've been open with them. We have conversations. They would ask how it's going, and I'll tell them exactly how it's going, because they could see there's no point in sugarcoating any of this stuff, because they are human after all, and I'm human, and I wanted to have that genuine interaction with them. So they were very understanding, very supportive. And a lot of the people that were my customers still follow me now. I still talk to them on social media, so it's not like they weren't. They're still supportive of what I do at the moment. But it was not a decision I took lightly. It was not a decision I wanted to do. And I certainly do go back and overlook everything that I've done. Like, I mean, I'm quite regularly, there's probably many business owners that have had to ever close a business, trying to work out what I could have done differently to stop what had happened. And I don't actually know what else I could have done. So it's really hard to, even at the time, I was like, I shouldn't have let this happen. This was in my control and I let this happen. And I've let people down because of that. And that was...
So there was nothing in hindsight that's come up that you look back and you think, I could have done that differently?
Oh yes, there's plenty I would do differently, probably the way I led it from the beginning. But I couldn't change any of that. I don't think... I couldn't necessarily see the situation with the cost of living crisis happening in the way it happened. Certainly a lot of not being able to get hold of stock and how that changed. That was definitely not something I was expecting. Or having to deal with a global pandemic. that was never in my plans of worst case scenario planning. I don't think it was in anybody's. So, I often did wonder if my husband ran the business, if he worked full time, but he was a businessman, if he'd done it, would he have done it completely differently and got through it? And I'll never know the answer to that. And I often sometimes do think about it quite a lot, but that doesn't necessarily get me moving forward. I could have looked in those first 15 months, I could have been much more prepared for business and done things differently, maybe not started in the way I had, because I started from rookie status. Maybe I should have done something else smaller first, but I don't work like that. So in a way, I learned on the job, I learned from my team, and I made lots and lots of mistakes along the way. But everything I learned, I used to help get the business better. So there's probably lots of things I could have done differently. I'm sure if you spoke to my team, they would have told you, there was lots of things I could have done differently. But I had to work with the information I had in front of me a lot of the time and try and figure out, make a choice. So whether my decisions were right, I don't know. I don't know what choices that I could have done differently to get it beyond where it got to.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I regret having to close it. That's one thing I can't ever change. But I still can't figure out how I could have done it differently to stop it from closing. So I never regret doing it. I love working for myself, and having that ability and owning my own cafe and bar and bakery. I would have had a regret by not doing it, even though it didn't necessarily go in the direction I wanted it to go in. I would have regret not having that opportunity and giving it a go. I honestly could not imagine myself sat behind a desk at somebody else's business anymore.
And you talked about, there was things in that first 15 months that you would have done differently. If you got one kind of significant example?
I probably would have had, I've probably got a couple. One is, I was pretty good at keeping an eye on some of the numbers, but numbers was not my thing. I was much more in the let's get things done kind of phase. So definitely, maybe I wouldn't have necessarily employed as many staff as I did because we were so busy. I employed more people, but actually what I needed to do was rethink my operations and got that more streamlined. So that might have helped with the keeping some of the budgets a bit more in check. So that is definitely one thing to think about. Is actually, if I'd really looked at it properly, I would have probably changed my operations sooner, so that it meant it cost me less in the business. The other thing I probably would have done was put more boundaries in for myself, because I felt I needed to be there all the time, doing everything, being everybody in the team, doing everything. And that was the wrong approach. I didn't need to do that. I needed to think like a CEO and stop worrying that other people didn't see me as part of the team. I'm the boss. They're not necessarily going to like me. They don't have to. They just have to do a good job. And I want them to do a good job and enjoy their job. That was my premise. So I didn't need to be there to help them do that. I needed to be the CEO of the business. So that's definitely what I would have done differently, is kind of had that mindset shift of being a CEO and just maybe had a kind of thought a bit harder about the operations and how that affected my business costs.
I suppose in a sort of similar kind of question, now looking back about the whole experience, what kind of key lessons have you had from that you're maybe now incorporating into your new business?
I think definitely a couple of things is the boundaries thing. So creating strong boundaries for yourself, because I found, running your own business, it tends to get involved in every aspect of your life. But I never really fully kind of made those distinct changes. Like often I'm a workaholic anyway, and I can work for hours and hours. But that's not the best approach. And actually making sure you have time for self-care and being realistic with your time, that's also really important. So definitely putting those strong boundaries in, I think.
And what do those boundaries now look like? How do you actually do that in practice?
In practice, I don't say I've necessarily got that right. I'm just in the middle of finishing off writing my book, so I've been working every hour possible. But it's basically not working more hours than you should do, having time for your family, being clear with when you can work and when you are working. And I definitely put those much more in place, because obviously running a business that operated 24/7 meant I was contacted 24/7. I started getting really strict with when people could contact me and when I was going to respond. So I stopped responding on days we were shut, like Sundays, because we're closed on Sundays. And I'm not going to respond to my staff that seem to have a habit of wanting to email or message me about something that had happened over the weekend on a Sunday morning. And then that will be what I'd be dealing with all the Sunday. So now even though I've like I said, been finishing off my book and just on launch, so I've worked a little bit too much. But when I come back into the new year, I'm going to kind of get clear on, like, I'm going to make sure I don't necessarily work on my weekends, or if I do, I'm going to take that time off during the week and have a bit of time for myself, rather than all I do is, baking is fun, right? So I quite enjoy doing that, as does my husband, because he gets baked goods, as he commented that the biscuit tin was empty today. But
the hardship.
I know, things he does. But yeah, they're definitely having that a clear boundary, and when it gets out of whack again, is checking back in with yourself and kind of going, actually, what am I doing here? Get a grip, have some time off. If you're burnt out, like I have done, your business isn't going to run without you. So you need to put those boundaries in place. So having strong boundaries will give you like that really good premise from the start of your business to set it up for success.
And I think you were going to say
another lesson. I think I interrupted you. What was the other lesson?
Yeah, the one thing that, and this I hear a lot from other people that are in this industry, is pricing. We have this, it's the money mindset side of it. We don't really ever think about it, particularly when you're going into a business because you love it. I'm doing it because I love it, so therefore I can't charge. And that was one thing I got the amount of hours I spent worrying about my prices and, am I charging too much money? That was my own issues, nobody else's. And if people said that was too expensive, I've been like, well, you're not my customer then. If you're not willing to pay, then you're not my customer. And there's plenty of other businesses that will accept your custom, but I'm not probably right for you, and that's fine. It's okay to accept that. But I wanted to please everybody, so I sometimes undercharge for stuff, and it was the wrong thing to do. It wasn't sustainable for my business in places, and I didn't need to do it because people were happy to pay. So again, I think it's definitely thinking about money issues and being open about them. And I talk quite a bit about money, particularly in some of the stuff I do now, because there is nothing wrong with doing a business and making a profit from it. It's actually the right thing to do. Just for some reason, we think because we love it, we can't charge. And I've grown up a musician, and that was a choice I made as a child. I was asked, do you want to make money or do you want to be a musician? That was a question I was asked. I think I was about 12. And I chose music.
Why are they different?
Because only famous people make money. That was how it was going to be. Only if you're getting the best orchestras in the world, you'll make money. That was what I was told. And that's what I grew up believing. So I became a suffering artist because I love music. It's the wrong approach.
Another kind of limiting belief then around money then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear it so often, actually. It's a common theme that runs through a lot of baking businesses, and people the same thing. They believe that because they do it. I don't want to earn much from it. I just want to make a living. Like, you can earn as much as you like. You don't have to limit yourself. This is your business, your rules. And that I can't exactly go in charging £10 for a cup of coffee. I don't think anyone in my local community would have brought that. So I charged the right price for my costs. But it took me a hell of a long time to work out what they were. Not because I didn't have the numbers. I just didn't know how to do it. It was a myth. And I didn't feel like I could charge profit because I wanted to do it because it was something I was doing for the community. And I realised that was the wrong approach. So I changed that strategy. I got a bit smarter. I realised that I had to price my products with profit in it. Otherwise, if something breaks, I can't pay for it. So I had to rethink that. So that's definitely having that kind of awareness of what you're charging for you, not everybody else, and having that, being clear of your money mindset of what you want to take out of the business. That's something I think people forget.
I think it's a common theme across all entrepreneurs, to be honest. It's a confidence thing. It's all to do with self-worth and, as you say, limiting beliefs around money and mindset is people not feeling confident enough that they can charge what actually should be the value of that product. And I think it is a common theme, not just in hospitality, but across lots of industries. But just looking at this pricing thing, because that's the only thing when you were talking about the levers that you could have pulled during the fallout of the pandemic and obviously the inflationary stuff and the consequences of that. That's the only thing that I was going to sort of follow up with was around the pricing. Do you think that because of what you just talked about around having that limiting belief at one point in your life around money, that then that held you back from maybe increasing your prices to the extent which some hospitality business is potentially did? Because also I was thinking how, because everything that you were saying was, they're obviously huge challenges and they're not easy to overcome. And I don't know the stats, but I'm sure a lot of hospitality businesses have closed because of exactly the reasons you stated. But obviously some haven't. And so then I'm thinking, well, why have some closed and some haven't? What are those ones that haven't closed done differently? Is it, is it their pricing? Is it, that I don't know, I'm speculating, but is there something that you could have done differently on pricing, do you think?
I took off the items on the menu that weren't making me any money. So I changed my prices. But when you're working with bread and dough, and you got in sourdough, in mine there was only 3 ingredients: bread, flour, water, salt. So obviously the cost of water didn't really change that much. The salt is minimal, and we used to get it from the same company, and they didn't actually put their prices up hugely. The flour went up by 150%. So, and I was charging already £4 a loaf for my bread. So when I'm starting to get into the realms of £5-6 to make it viable, because people think, oh, it's only flour, water and salt. It's a whole building. There's a whole star that go into that cost of that loaf of bread. It's not just a magic loaf of bread that's made out of the ingredients. There's so much more to it. That everything else had gone up. The energy had gone up. I know bakeries that were paying $1,500 a month, that were paying over 5 figures a month. You can not get the amount of footfall in or charged. You can't start suddenly charging £10 a loaf because no one's going to buy it. So there's a choice to be made there. And you think, well, I could, and I might get enough customers in, but I'm going to lose my loyal ones because they're not going to suddenly pay twice as much for a loaf of bread. So it's a real tricky balance, and stuff that was costing my money came off. And I often do think about how did some of those businesses survive and how them, and I often look at the ones in my local town and think, how have you got through it? And I absolutely do not know how they could have got through it. I knew, but my costs were probably a little bit higher than them because you pay for window space, and I had a lot of windows. So my building was naturally higher in rent because I had lots of windows compared to others, but still rents were high in my town. But when I look at some of the most successful chefs, entrepreneurs across the world, some have opened businesses and some have closed businesses during COVID equally, like Tom Kerridge, for example. He opened a business that thrived, had to close one that wasn't. So he's someone that clearly knows what he's doing because he's very successful at what he does. But sometimes it is just a matter of the wrong place, the wrong time. Every town was different. So when I actually announced I was going to be closing, I was actually doing a 24-hour speakathon for Mind with my local community. So all of us entrepreneurs in the local town would go on for an hour with one of the kind of business owner leaders, and we'd talk about our businesses and various things. And I told him I'm going to announce I'm closing in this time. And we were talking about like the reasons behind how it affected different businesses. And actually, every town responded to COVID in a different way. There wasn't all the cost of living crisis. Every town had different intricacies in the way it worked that had different problems. So even though some survived and some didn't, I don't think it was like one size fits all that I could have changed to make my business work, because it was different from other people's. It was in a different town, different location. My high street just suffered completely, really struggled, whereas other high streets suddenly thrived. So in a way, it was, I think, just a combination of factors. So if my business had possibly been in a different place at a different time, I think it probably would have survived, because the model worked. It just was the wrong moment in the wrong place at that point. So it's one I do often wonder how I could have done it differently. Could I change my prices? Could I have got rid of another member of, made another member of staff redundant? To what end? Other than me working more hours, which wasn't sustainable, or putting up my prices, which ultimately would have probably affected my customers, or any more than I had. I put them up. But, when you're looking at a business like a cafe, you're not making huge amounts of money on coffee. You're making some money on coffee, and it was our biggest seller in tea, but I'd have to sell double for it to become viable again. So the footfall was the problem that I had. And there's much marketing and PR and all of that stuff I could do to get people in, special offers, just wasn't enough for what they wanted and what they were willing to pay for in a time when they were struggling because of the financial situation.
Obviously, this business was your baby, and you can tell how kind of passionate you were about it. And obviously, it was a family venture as well, so you had a lot riding on it. Given it is still fairly new, where do you think you are with it now in terms of how has it impacted you personally? And I was just thinking about it in terms of grief, because essentially you could view it from the lens of the grief cycle, and I was sort of thinking, where are you in that grief cycle? Because you've lost that business, and it is like someone has died in some ways, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So where are you?
I think, the first few days after it was closed, basically everything had to basically be removed from the business. So that was everything you built up, all of those things over the years, just to watch it all be basically take apart in a matter of days, was quite soul destroying, I think. And my husband and I was like, we're going to just go away for a few days. And we went to Dubai for 4 days, and it rained the entire time. I'm like, oh, this sums it up really. Pick a really hot country that's never rained, and it rains the only 4 days of the year on the days we're there. So anyway, I think that kind of summed up how I was feeling at the time. But actually, I got to sort of with the grief cycle. I still think about it every day. I think I'd done as much as I could with it, and I talked about it, like, do I open something else up differently? Just maybe wait a little bit. Do I go for the scones online? What do I do next? So it wasn't like I kind of came out of the business and thought, I've got to get a job, because that's just not in me anymore. I just can't. It's working for someone else is my idea of the worst idea. Working for other business owners and freelancing, I'd happily do that. Working for another company is not my thing. I just don't. It's just not for me. So I was thinking, well, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And that's where I kind of ended up with the business I've got now, because I thought, okay, well, I'll have a bit of a break. I've got a business strategy. Maybe I could open up another place and do something a bit differently, go online, look at my options. And I thought, actually, what I could do is help other baking business owners, because I can be vocal about my experience. I can speak out about what I've done. And I've had a huge learning curve. I started with nothing. Yeah, I walked into a building that wasn't ready. I had no experience whatsoever, other than the experience I'd had from the job before. And I built up this business that had so many successes, even though it couldn't necessarily weather the storm financially and operationally. But there was so much I learned from that I could help other people get to where they want to. And I can share everything I've learned from baking, because I didn't go in knowing everything. I didn't even know how to make sourdough. I never made sourdough before I opened the business, yet it became one of the best loaves in the country. And that was through a lot of hard work and trial and error, and really having to have that approach of, I'm going to learn from this. And I know how lonely it is. The one thing that I really struggled with when I first opened was, one, the self-confidence. And I think a lot of it does come down to the confidence and the mindset. But suddenly I didn't have a boss. I was the boss. I had no one to ask or get validation from, because that was me. And when you're doing it alone, that's hard. That's really tough. You have to trust all your doubts are right and hope for the best. And you've got to keep the faith. So I know what that pressure feels like, because I've done it, and I had it in an extreme way to what most people start with. I think by the end of the second month, I had 17 staff. So it hadn't gone for, I thought I was going to have 4. I had 17. So it was completely different to what I thought I was going to have. And I wanted to be able to give people that kind of, share that love of baking, share that knowledge that I learned, as well as help them with their businesses, because I love baking and I love business, and I wanted to be able to help them. So that's what I decided to do, was to start the business pretty much the day it officially went into insolvency as such. And that was create Baking Boss, which is what I do now. So it's what I do is now help baking business owners start and grow their businesses. So, I help them when they're kind of really struggling to know what to do next. And going through like environmental health, I mean, that is terrifying. If you've ever had environmental health come around, it's the most terrifying experience. Actually, then most of the time it isn't, but it's being able to give people the confidence and some of the knowledge that I didn't have, but probably wasted so much money trying to figure it out and trying and get stuff wrong that I didn't need to. But I looked for someone like me. I tried to find a coach that dealt with small businesses in the baking world, like a cafe, and they either dealt with big food brands or big restaurants. And I was small fry to them. They weren't interested. And even the ones where I did employ later on to help as consultant, it was a waste of money. They just did not get it. Right. They did not understand. And it was wrong. What they were suggesting was completely wrong. They'd give me a whole different product menu. And I'm like, I see what you're saying here, but this isn't going to work in my town. People don't even know what half of these things mean. So again, I wanted to be able to provide people that support and knowledge and guidance, and know someone's got their back, and know someone's got the ability to go to someone and go, how on earth do you scale up bread making? Because I have no idea. I'm like, I had no idea about that. Google didn't tell me any answers to that one. I had to make it up. But you don't feel like you can go to other business owners and ask them all their trade secrets. It just doesn't feel right. So that's why I decided to do what I do now. So I talk about my business almost, the cafe, bar and bakery, almost every day, which is kind of in a way a bit of, I suppose, a therapy if you like, but I do it to help people because I can help people. And that's what I started the business, is because I like helping people. I wanted to give them something else. And that's what I want to do, is help this community where people just want to bake for many reasons. But a lot of the people that start like learning to bake and are in my baking groups actually maybe one day will start a business. And why should they deny the world of their cakes and bakes and breads? Because they should share them. I love cake.
Who doesn't? And given the fact that you're in business with your husband and your dad, and you kind of mentioned they were sort of silent business partners in some ways, was there ever any kind of tension or fallout at any point because of the strains of the business, the fact that it was coming under severe kind of challenge?
Oh yeah, I mean ultimately there was. I think my dad has always been we're very similar mindsets, and I grew up with him, so he's very much keep calm and carry on. He's very like this, so he's not a lot phases him, and he's very kind of stable, and he's a very good sounding board and things like that. But there, of course, particularly as opposed to my husband, we have 2 different ways of working. I work in a certain way, he works in a different way. I manage teams in a different way to the way he manages teams. And there were conversations where I felt like I had to be the managing director, the CEO of the business, to ask him to step back because I didn't want to confuse the direction of my team. And it was quite a challenging thing to have to do, is kind of go, right, I'm going to talk to you about business head on, and then I'll come back to being your wife later. But at the moment, you're interfering with how I'm doing stuff, and I can't have you doing that because it's not helping me. It's undermining my authority sometimes, and it makes my staff confused as to know who to talk to. So there were conversations at points where we had those kind of conversations. And also, I'd get home from work, and some days it would be quite busy days, and you talk to a lot of people. The last thing I want to do is get into the nitty-gritty of the business at that point. So I had to put some boundaries in place that worked for me, because I needed to get that space from it and have a bit of time to debrief and think. He's very much I'm going to take action now and think in the heat of the moment. I'm a thinker, so I need time to digest stuff. So the way we came at it was two different approaches. So sometimes that would definitely cause tension. And I think eventually, after a bit of kind of rating each other up the wrong way for a while, we managed to figure out the best way to work with that. And that was definitely by letting me do my job, letting me manage it in the way I needed to manage it, because I found it very difficult to manage it with him over my shoulder in some ways. And he did have really great advice and really great suggestions and great ideas. And I'd have to then decide whether I took them forward or not. So sometimes that would be quite challenging. But in a way, he could do a lot of things that I couldn't do. And that was invaluable to the business, as was my dad's knowledge. And I think there's always going to be tensions with any team. Any close-knit team will have tensions. But I think in the end, we did figure out the best way of working together, but it took us a while. But what I have learned is that we can't do similar roles or one of us manages the other, because that does not work. We're too strong-minded and two different approaches. So if we ever went into business together, I don't know whether we would do, but if we did, we would have very different roles in the business, I think, because it's the only way we would ever work together.
And you talked about, you used the word lonely earlier, which is an interesting word considering you were working with your dad and your husband. Why did you feel lonely?
It was, I suppose, in some senses, because I was the one that was I had the most majority control. I was the one in charge. And we were all none the wiser in what we were doing. We were all coming in at equal footing. I mean, we've all got different business experiences from our own careers to bring in. And all of us are quite practically minded and logically minded. But I was taking on the bulk of that responsibility. So I would overrule them on occasions, and I would have to stick my neck out without knowing whether it was the right decision or not. And actually, I think it was the loneliness of not knowing whether I'm doing things right. That was where it was really hard, because I had a lot of self-doubt, and I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. But I didn't know who I could ask, because I could ask my staff, and I could ask my dad and my husband, but none of them really knew the answers to what I was trying to find out. And a lot of it, of course, when you're starting out a business, you are venturing into the unknown, so there aren't the answers there right in front of you. So that was really incredibly lonely, because no one really could understood, other than someone who was in my position, what it's like to lead that kind of a business and try and manage it. And particularly through some of the challenging times that we went through, that was a lot for anybody, let alone business owners that were having to make sure that people didn't lose their jobs and staff, and you kept your business owner open because you're supporting communities and stuff like that. So that was where it felt really tough sometimes. And I think when I found, like I mentioned, the business community I found earlier, they were a great support in so many ways. And they weren't like one of those networking groups that you've gone to, and I've been to a few of these, and I've just been like where they go and everybody's like, I'm really good and really clever at what I do. And I'm like, I am. I want people that gives me the reality. I want to talk to humans here that kind of go, hey, look, you know what? It's all right to fall apart as a business owner, because that is just what happens. And sometimes you would need that, but you didn't know who you could, like I said, you didn't have a boss to run to. You didn't necessarily have that kind of person that you could run to and go, something is not going right. I don't know why. What do I do? And they would steer you off in the right direction, because I had to decide what that was. So that would be where it get quite lonely. And I think a lot of, certainly in many industries, but when I talk to like a lot of the people that are doing it as a side hustle or just starting out with their baking businesses, they're doing it from home. They are completely on their own. And some of them that have, like, sometimes they do it because they've had a family and they want something that fits in with working with their family. They haven't got, most of their friends are working 9 to 5, so they haven't even got their friendship support around them. So even though I have people around them, I had people around me all the time, they weren't necessarily the ones that could understand what was going on in my head.
Which is why, and I obviously speaking as a business owner as well, that I completely agree and resonate with what you're saying about having peer support from other business owners, because it's so reassuring to hear other people say, yeah, it's really hard, or yeah, it's really difficult sometimes to get out of bed because you don't want to have to face all the challenges you're going to have to face that day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is a good question for you, given that, from what we've heard today, you kind of just jump into things. So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs about how to handle the fear of failure?
It's a really great question, but I think you shouldn't see failure as a bad thing. And I beat myself up saying I failed at stuff and I failed at this business. Actually, without this business, I wouldn't be where I am now. So sometimes it is just about failure is about learning. It's about taking the knowledge of what didn't work and making it better next time. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with getting stuff wrong. I've got so many things wrong in business that I would have probably done differently if I'd had the insight, but I didn't. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use that and make it better next time, because that's all I've got. And that's all I can do. I can't know what I don't know. So I used to work years and years ago, I worked at a glue factory. I did actually do anything with glue. I know, random job, but I was actually an admin. And one of the people there was telling me about a company, because this company used to build like Formula One cars and all sorts of things. So it was quite an interesting place to be in there. So one of the car manufacturers over in Japan, they had a button. So every time they did something wrong when they're making a car, they'd press this button and everyone would pile over and look at what's gone wrong, because they can all learn from it. They can all learn and then know either not to do that again or make an adjustment in the whole operation. It's like, well, that's a great way of looking at failure. It's a learning. It's something we can do next. We got failures, we can learn from it. If you get everything right all the time, you're not going to necessarily grow. So it's just part of the way the world goes sometimes. Sometimes you have to try something to know that you can then move on to do something else.
Love it. And again, I think this question is really pertinent for you, because having run a business through COVID, a hospitality business through COVID, and come out the other side, and then having to deal with all the stuff you dealt with in terms of the inflationary environment and things like that, and the supply chain issues. So you survived so much. So those people out there that might have been experiencing severe challenges or setbacks within their business, what advice would you give to them?
My advice would be is just to trust your instincts of what you got to do next. So the worst thing any business owner wants to do is want to close. That's usually the last resort we get to, particularly when it feels like it's taken out of our hands. But it's not a failure to do that. It's just being honest as a business owner about where your business is and what it's doing next. And it's been really tough, and it's still really tough for a lot of businesses trying to weather through that storm. But all you can do is keep looking forward and keep moving forward, taking another step, reevaluating, being agile, looking at the next option. Just look at the information you've got and work to that. That's all we can do. It's just keep moving forward. And sometimes you sometimes have to rethink the business. We have to change direction. Sometimes it's just about being honest with yourself and going, this is it. I can't do this one anymore, whether it's for financial reasons, whether it's for your own health and well-being, because you come first in everything. If it's too much for you now, and there's nothing wrong if it's too much. I burnt out. I had to stop. I was forced to stop because my body went, no, you're done. Give up. But don't let yourself get to that point. And you know what? If you are getting to a point where you're really struggling, reach out to me. I've been there, so I know what it's like. So come and check me out and drop me a message, and I'll be there, because I don't want anyone to feel like they're alone in any of this.
That's an amazing offer. So, last question then. If you could go back in time and stop that failure from happening, or that business closure, would you do that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was a great business. It had so much going for it. Something happens because that's what's supposed to happen. If I hadn't closed that business and I wasn't here now, I wouldn't be able to help other people get better at what they're doing. There are so many people that don't necessarily think they got the opportunity to start businesses that should and have absolutely the capability to do it. They just don't believe in themselves or have the knowledge, and they're afraid to do it. So I can actually give so much more doing what I'm doing now. So even though that business could keep going, I would still want to be helping other people do something they love as well. And hey, like I say, we all need more cake in the world. If people can't make more cake, they're doing a disservice to the world.
Brilliant. So we're going to end on a quick fire round. So this is short questions and short answers.
Perfect.
So first question is, failure is?
Learning.
What is your life's mission?
To help people.
What's one piece of advice that you would want to give on your deathbed to others?
Do what you want to do because you love what you do.
What's one habit that keeps you resilient?
Fitness.
Running marathons, right?
Yeah, I don't do that anymore.
If you could be immortal, would you take it?
No.
Why not?
Oh, I think you should live life to the maximum without an end, like knowing this is my time and I'm going to live it to the best life. Also, I don't know if I want to get that many wrinkles.
What's one surprising fact that not many people know about you?
Not many people know about me. I ride motorbikes.
Great. And last question, what's one guest you think I should have on?
Ooh, one guest. That's a really great question. I think I'm going to go for one in the baking community, because I think this will be a good one. And that's actually one of my favourite people is Nadia Hussain. I think she's incredible. She was a Bake Off winner back in, I can't remember which year now, but actually I think she's a true inspiration.
Has she had any good stories of failure?
Oh, well, she won Bake Off, so I don't know. But I mean, yeah, she's her life is a very interesting life, and she is definitely one to interview her in some of the challenges that she's overcome.
Brilliant. So Naomi, where can people find you and connect with you?
So I'm on the socials at I Am Baking Boss, and you can go to my website, bakingboss.net. I've got the podcast, which is Baking Boss Kitchen Secrets, where I share everything that in my experience of running a business and advice for people, which is also available from my website. And drop me an email, naomi@bakingboss.net, because I like chatting. And if you're on my weekly email list, you'll get some random email about the latest thing happening in my life with a funny story that I usually tie nicely back into a little anecdotal business. So come enjoy that.
Fantastic. Sounds like there's certainly loads of places for people to connect with you. So really enjoyed today's conversation. So thanks so much for being here and being so open and honest with everything that you've faced in the last few years. Really appreciate you being here.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Fail. Really hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please do subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It really does help us to grow and to reach more people. Do follow us on social media too. We're at Jeswood on Instagram and at Beyond the Fail on YouTube and also on Linktree. Thanks again and see you soon.